When Arthur was a very young king, he heard reports of a madman who lived deep in Camelot forest. Pay no attention to these idle rumors, he was told. It's just some lunatic who has sealed himself up in a hut and will soon die. But something in Arthur was stirred. He summoned a troop of horses and set out to find the madman. After several days, the royal party came upon a clearing not far from the main road through the forest. In the middle of the clearing was a crude hut made of mud and wattle, so badly put together that bare branches stuck out everywhere. Arthur dismounted and walked up to it. There was no door, but only a small window to let in the air. "Who is in there?" he asked. "One who is not of this world," a weak voice answered. Arthur stood for a moment thinking. "I would have conversed with you, whoever you are. Come out, on order of the king." "I have no king. Leave me alone," the voice said. "But you have no food or water either. You need help," Arthur said. "I don't need your help," the voice replied, and then would not utter another word. The courtiers wanted Arthur to depart forthwith, but he gave orders that anyone who had information about the man should be brought to him. 2 horsemen rode off deeper into the forest, and soon they returned with a poor woman dressed in rags. "This is the madman's wife," one of the horsemen said. The woman was a-tremble, utterly confused and frightened. "Please, be calm. I only want to help your husband," Arthur said. The woman still trembled, but replied, "He doesn't call me wife anymore. My will has sworn to stay walled up in that hut until he either dies or receives a sign from God." "Why?" asked Arthur. "Grief, my lord. We had a son he loved above anything in this world. My will is a woodcutter, and one day he was about to set out into the forest with our boy, who was 6. Will was too intent on his work, and when he wasn't looking, the lad slipped away. We called and searched until we were frantic, but after a day, the little body floated downstream. Our boy was drowned, and my husband cannot forgive himself." The poor woman's story much saddened Arthur. "Grief is no reason to kill oneself," he said. "So says I," the woman declared, "but Will has sworn that until God himself comes to tell him why our son was taken away, he will curse this world and have nothing to do with it. I have watched the kind of suffering God permits all my life," he says, "and I won't have no more to do with it. He won't appear to explain himself, then I'm as good as dead anyway." Despite the poignancy of the woman's story, Arthur couldn't help but be intrigued by this man's curious approach to God. "Is all this true?" he said into the hut. There was a low grunt, but otherwise Will the woodcutter had nothing to say. "I'm going to spend the night here to converse with this poor wretch," Arthur announced, sending the rest of the party home. The courtiers were reluctant to abandon their king in the forest alone, but eventually he persuaded them to ride away and camp within half a league. Night fell quickly, and no moon rose. Arthur sat beside the hut, wrapped in his cloak, to ward off the damp. "In some ways, I feel closer to you than anyone in my kingdom," he began. "I am new to my rule, and I keenly feel the suffering that surrounds me. The poor, sick, and crippled exist everywhere. It seems that I could spend my whole life and fortune to combat the misfortune I see around me, and yet, like spring wheat, the seeds of woe would sprout twice as thick next season." "I am waiting for God," the voice inside the hut suddenly interjected. "I don't need to hear your speeches. Let him answer for himself." "Fair enough," replied Arthur. "But once I had a master named Merlin, and he told me that there is only one solution to evil and woe, which is not to struggle against them, but to realize that evil does not exist. In that case, you should despair and shut yourself up in this hut with me, for you have seen God's true feelings towards this world. He wants us to suffer," the voice said bitterly. "I felt like you for a long time, but Merlin said that there are 2 paths in life. On one path, a person tries to be good to win the reward of heaven, and if he lives virtuously, he will attain his goal. But even in paradise, there are seeds of discontent, and eventually, out of boredom or a fear that heaven isn't deserved, a person will soon move the other way. He will sink towards the opposite pole, and eventually find himself in hell. Hell must exist if heaven exists, but it's just as temporary, for in time, the person will tire of its torments and start to rise upwards again. Thus, the first path a soul can choose is a constant round, moving from hell to heaven and back again over and over. If what you say is true, we are mocked as well as damned, the voice said with deeper bitterness. Who can love a father that holds out paradise only to send us back to hell? You are right, Arthur said. My master avowed the same thing. But then he told me of a second path. The key to this path is the realization that heaven and hell are created by ourselves, that we are the ones who keep the cycle going, because we believe in duality, that there must be evil as the opposite of good, just as light must also have a shadow, or it would not be light. Having said this, we can make a different choice. And what might that be, the voice inquired? To denounce duality, to refuse both heaven and hell. Beyond the play of opposites, Merlin said, lies a timeless realm of pure light, pure being, pure love. All this business of good and evil, he said, stop chasing your tail and walk away from it. I cannot speak for you, my friend, but to me, that is the divine message. If God is to appear to us, it is through our own understanding of what is possible. Our will is free, and we can chain ourselves to the cycle of pleasure and pain forever. But we are equally free to walk away and never suffer again. Arthur stopped, suddenly realizing how strange it was for a king to be trying to talk this way to a poor wretch he had never met. I'm sorry to intrude on your grief, he apologized. I will take my leave of you now. The man in the hut made no reply. Arthur got up, pulled his cloak together, and moved off into the forest. He was 100 feet away when he thought he felt a glow at his back and the sound of flames. Fearing that the madman had set the hut on fire, he turned and began to run back, only to stop in his tracks. It wasn't an earthly fire. The hut had turned into a ball of brilliant white light, and out of it rose a blazing angel who said, I was told by God that you mortals knew a secret, and as always, he was right. You know that God isn't simply in heaven, but far beyond, in the realm of pure spirit. Live by this truth and be free.
This is, I think, the only mystical lesson on the wizard's way. But even without the angelic message, it underlies the whole point of self-discovery. The spark of divine fire must be within us if it is anywhere. And in questing after this spark, we cannot walk a path dictated by opposites, such as pleasure and pain. Pleasure and pain exist to speak to us, yes, to give us signals about how our body and mind are doing. But ultimately, the greatest pleasure anyone can imagine is not the same as fullness of spirit, nor is the greatest pain the absence of spirit. Spirit is beyond both pleasure and pain. It is found in pure awareness, pure knowingness. In the end, the wizards may answer our questions, but it is up to us to continue on this path. We have to test their answers until they become our own. As long as Merlin is someone existing out there in the world, he can only be a guide. But once we find the inner wizard, the wisdom becomes our own, fully integrated into our body and mind.